Everyone, this is Mitch Joe for Chartboost. I am going to give a summary of the last 3 months of work that I've done on UX research. And so the agenda for today's presentation will be a quick overview, and then I'll talk about the different UX research methods that I used, and we'll dive into a case study about the segment builder product, and then I'll wrap up with a brief summary. Okay, so overview. Why do we conduct user research? Here's a quote from our own Corey Saviano, a product manager. While she was using a Chartboost product, she said, well, this is how I would do it, but I don't know if I'm normal. So I thought that really embodies why we do research. As product managers and as designers and anyone working at Chartboost, we're much closer to the product than any normal user would be. So it's hard to keep that distance and look at the product as a user would and make that product for the user. So we don't know if we're normal, and in fact, we probably know that we're not normal. So that's why we do research, to stay in touch with the user's needs and wants and make the product around them. Okay, 27. Anybody have any idea what this number represents? In the original presentation when I gave this, I think Corey actually guessed the correct number of what this was, and it is the number of user studies conducted. Here's some faces to put some faces to the numbers. People from all over the world and all different types of games. Number 4, I think Bernie guessed this one correctly. It is the number of products that we tested. Advertiser onboarding, segment builder, level tracking, and chartboost.com after it got a makeover from the marketing team. And I'll dive in deeper to a case study about segment builder later. Okay, 35. This number is an approximation. I think Caroline guessed it correctly. And it is the number of changes that we made based on user feedback and after all this testing. So the great thing about being able to make changes quickly is that you can just pivot. As soon as you see something wrong, you can make a change. We made changes sometimes as quickly as after seeing one user struggle with something. We would go back, change it quickly, and the next user would see a different version. So that's great to be able to move so quickly. And it makes sense to make these changes at the design stage because they're cheap as chalk. It's better to involve just the designer's time rather than a designer and an engineer, and then find out the user doesn't like it and have to have the designer and the engineer make changes to it later. Okay, last number here, 243,712. Again, this is an approximation or an estimate, and it is of the number of headaches and dollars saved by conducting user research. Okay, I'll dive into the different methods that I used. The first is a heuristic evaluation, which is an expert review to ensure that the design is following all the best UX practices. So I was able to do this just when I first started without being familiar with the Chartboost product. There are things that you can, just with the background in usability and UX and best practices, there are things that I can spot, like this one where we weren't using the folder openers and closers in the right way. The standard, which you see on the left here, is closed points horizontally and then open points down. And what Chartboost uses in some places is that open points down, which is the standard, but that closed, instead of pointing sideways, is pointing up. Another thing that I was able to catch was that in uploading assets, we were showing what device coverage they would get after they uploaded the assets, but the task at hand on this page was to upload assets, and the information that they need to do that task is the exact pixel dimensions of the assets that need to be uploaded, and that information was hidden behind a tooltip, a little question mark, but it seems like that information is definitely important enough that it should be exposed, not hidden, because it's information that everyone needs to know. So, I'm able to come in and do that sort of evaluation. And the pro of this sort of evaluation is that you don't need to talk to anyone else. You don't even need extreme familiarity with the Chartboost product. So the pro is you don't need to talk to anyone else, but the con is that you're not talking to anyone else. So you get better information if you were talking to users. But this is just a quick way to jump in and do a quick evaluation. We created personas based on users that I talked to, and also talking to the account management and business team who spend a lot of their time talking to users. So I could talk to them and ask them about users. I came up with 3 different types of personas for advertisers. One on the right here was the independent developer, who is pretty different. He's sort of an amateur user of Chartboost, not super business savvy or savvy in the ways of the advertising world. And the way that he uses Chartboost is much different from the 2 pros on the left. There's 2 different types of pro. One is internal to a game company. This would be a user acquisition manager. And the other type of pro would be working for an agency, working on behalf of several companies and dozens of games. So how the pro users use Chartboost is very different from how the amateur uses Chartboost. So it helps to keep this in mind when you're designing products. The pro of using personas to design your product is that you have kind of talked to a user. If you keep these personas in mind when you're designing a product, they do represent actual users. But the con of this approach is that you have only kind of talked to a user. So yes, these personas are better than nothing because they do represent users, but they're not as good as actually talking to users, because actually talking to users, you would get feedback on the particular product that you're working on at that point. And that's the 3rd type of method that I used, which is in-person interviews. And here you're bringing them a prototype or a live product, and you know that their feedback is super relevant to what you're working on. So that's the pro. It gives you the best information on exactly what you're working on. But the con is that it takes the longest amount of time. I typically try and sit with people for up to an hour. It could be just on one product. Sometimes it's shorter, but you definitely want to talk to them about what's their approach, their normal task flow, and how our tool helps them make their life easier. Okay, that's it for the different UX research methods. Now I'll dive into a case study about Segment Builder. The problem with Segment Builder, we were creating different user segments, and the problem was that we had a back-end constraint so that we had different types of logic. On the left here you see the AND logic, and on the right here you see the OR logic. So to make this more concrete, the circles, remember we're talking about user segments, so on the left you might want to target someone who has been playing your game for a month and also has made a purchase within that month. So they've done 2 things, and you need to have done both of those things to be part of this target, part of this user segment. So that's what that represents. We call that the AND logic, because they have to have done 2 things. And on the right you have the OR logic, where you might want to target people who have made a purchase in one of your apps and also, or have made a purchase in your other app. So you might have 2 apps and you want to target anyone who's made a purchase in either of your apps, and that's what that looks like logically. So we have these 2 things, we have this and this, but really the problem is that we have this or this. So we have these 2 types of logical structures, the AND structure, where you have to have done both things, and the OR structure, where you just need to have done either of the things to be part of the segment. But the problem is that we, due to the backend constraint, can't mix and match them. So you have to have all ANDs or all ORs. You can't mix and do both. And that becomes a problem when you think about multiple apps, because what someone might want to do on the left-hand side here is to target people who have been playing app 1 for a month and made a purchase in app 1, and also target people in app 2 who have been playing for app 2 for a month and made a purchase in app 2. And the problem comes up because it's easy to sort of naturally describe. So logically, um, how you describe the situation on the left is someone who has done, I'll just fill in the letters here, someone who has done A and B, or someone who has done C and D. But since we can't have a mix of ands and ors, what that's going to come out to in our backend language is the picture on the right, where the person has to have done A and B and C and D. And that most likely is not what the user wants to do here. They have the picture on the left in mind, but unfortunately we can't do that right now. And what we're going to end up giving them is the picture on the right, which is not what they intend. This problem is further complicated by the fact that the picture on the left it's describable in normal English language with only using the word and. So you might want to say, I want to target users who have been playing game 1 and made a purchase in game 1, and I want to target users who have been playing game 2 for a month and made a purchase in game 2. So I didn't use the word or anywhere in there, and so it's a problem. So another way to describe this problem is that they want iced tea and lemonade, and what we're going to give them is iced tea and lemonade. So again, normal use of the word and here in both cases, but very different situations here. So that's the problem, and the prediction is that this is going to be really hard for users to understand. This was our best design that we came up with, and in the old world without UX research, this is what would have launched. Of course, it would have had color. This is black and white, but would have had color, but this is what would have launched. So we have the ands and ors choice here represented within one app, and then also in between apps. But the problem is that once you choose or for any of these choices, it's going to flip the switch and make them all ors, because we just don't have the capability right now to have a mixture of ands and ors. So in the old world, we just would have launched because what else is there to do? But with research now, I want to say, hey, not so fast, Buster. Buster wants to kind of launch and use the force, but I want to sort of move the cloud away as far as we can and see what potential pitfalls might be there. So let's do some research first. And here's what we discovered. We discovered a few bombs. One actually had to do with the segment name. The field was so wide, one person actually treated this field as a search field. I asked her what she would enter there, expecting her to say segment name, but what she said was that she'd enter the name of a competitor's app and build, because she wanted to build a user segment around her competitor's app. The idea being that if they're interested in her competitor's app, they might be interested in her app as well. So that was a total failure of misunderstanding what this field is for. It's just supposed to name the segment, but it did give us the idea that, hey, this could be something useful for users and something we might want to build in the future, the ability to make segments like that. And actually, I think Bernie was already thinking about this for a future version. The next pitfall that we encountered was around wording. The add segment logic there, it wasn't clear to people why it was called a logic. And then the and or choice being on a different level here, people thought it would be act differently. So even if you kept them all as ands here, it was interpreted as that first version that I showed you earlier on the left, where although it was and, it was behaving differently, was their idea. But in fact, we knew that it was behaving the same and giving them this really narrow target. And then we have another wording pitfall here, add segment unit. Segment unit, that wording just wasn't clear to people. So we went back to the drawing board, came up with a new design. We made the choice for and or, just one clear choice at the front, added a little help text there, and changed some of the wording, and then took it to users again. Had some more pitfalls. It turns out that when people are creating user segments, the first thing in their mind is not choosing a logical operator. So that was confusing to people. So it seemed sort of out of context, I think, for them. The help text actually didn't help them much at all, so that was unfortunate. And then we had some wording trouble again at the bottom of the page, adding a segment app. It still wasn't clear, and choosing a dimension, the word dimension wasn't clear to people. So in version 3, here we shortened the segment name field so that it wouldn't be confused as a short search field. We changed the wording of and or to all and any, and had some help text there, which seemed a bit clear. We took it to users again, and this time it did help. No one confused the segment name for search field. People found all and any wording much clearer, especially after reading the helper text to the right of it. It was very clear to people. So that was great. And in the meantime, we also had, I was explaining it to Yenna, and it was a little bit confusing to explain just in words and conversation, and we were in a room, so I did what every good designer does. I hopped up on the whiteboard and started drawing a picture, and then she got it immediately. And that got me thinking, you know, if it's so easy to explain to Yenna with the picture, why aren't we using that in our design? So in the 4th version, we incorporated a little picture there with the Venn diagram, and we changed the setup here to the right of the picture where the help text was more a sentence that they had to read, and then that the all any choice was something that they made within the context of that sentence. So this worked well, I think, for a few reasons. It forced them to read the help text, and it put the choice in the context of something that was easy to understand. And we found here, again, no confusion over the name field. The drawing helped people a lot, and the wording, bringing the help text out in front and keeping all and any distinction there was very understandable to people. We changed the word dimension to criteria, which seemed to be much more readily understood to people. I would ask, once I showed people what was inside the dropdown, I'd give them a choice of words, labels for that dropdown, and criteria seemed to be what made most sense to people. And then quickly, a preview of the 5th version here. This is for a future version where we do have the ability to mix the and logic with the or logic. So here is what it would look like when you have 2 apps when you're going for that case where they've done action A and B in the first app and action C and D in the second app. And this was actually understood by people as well. So we've gone through 5 versions without having to do any engineering effort, which is great. And these photos, by the way, are staged. I asked Stanley and Meenal to look like they weren't working, and asked Dylan to hop on the skateboard. He's actually not even moving there. I asked him to just stand still so I could get the hammock in the picture too. Now I'll play a quick video that shows a user understanding it with one version, and then I showed her another version and the previous, which is actually a previous iteration. And what's interesting is that previous iteration was actually so confusing that even though she's understood it the first time, she doesn't understand it with the second design. So you go ahead and click on the drop down where it says all, up from there. What is the difference between this page and the page you were just looking at? Is there a difference?
Yeah.
So what is this? What is the difference?
The difference is for the all those rules, but for the enemy, they could fit this one, then or they could fit the rule 2, or they could fit the rule 1.
Okay, and what is the previous screen mean? Go ahead and click on any. So what does this one mean?
This one means you have to fit both rule 1 and rule 2.
Okay. And what if you click on add criteria, that link? No, down the blue link. What does this mean?
more hard for the players to reach. Hence, they added another rule. The player have to fit all three rules. Then they just got in this group.
Okay, so this is the second version. What do you think happens here if I chose a second app here?
They will compare those two apps together, choose what they all got.
What they all got. Can you say explain that?
The logic is the and.
The logic is and.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you think this and right here?
Yeah.
It acts the same as these ands?
No.
No.
This and here as a higher level. It's the app's level.
I'm sorry,
those
the what
ands
level?
are just inside the app.
Inside the app, yeah. Okay. Okay, so what if I had this sort of thing here in the top box in this second box with a second app? Can you explain to me what the target would be, the segment?
I think it's. I think they will compare those two apps first. Then, actually, I'm confused.
That's okay. I think I'm confused too. Did this picture here, did that help you?
Yeah, really. Yeah, really happy.
Helped you a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
So we just saw her look at two different versions, and you saw the first one she understood it, and the second one she didn't. And to our mind, she's looking at the same thing, but to her, they're very different. So that was interesting, and the picture helped her. Here's another video of someone understanding it, but eventually, I think it shows just how, he's a smart guy, and it shows how things can be confusing. Things that if you're too close to the product, it seems like, oh, this should be obvious to everyone, but it actually takes him a while to get it. So I'll just play this here. Actually, first, just say if you can say your understanding of what's going on.
Okay, so it looks like we're trying to target a group of users in Monster Rush that have purchased one of their ones and that have installed less than 2 weeks ago. And also we want to add in some other people that have purchased from another title of ours, Buster's Boost, maybe to get them into this, almost like to get them to play another one of our titles. We know they spend money. And that's kind of what I interpret that as.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you right, it sort of sounds like two groups of people, like a group of people who have played Monster Rush and done these two things,
Mm-hmm.
and a separate group of people who have played Buster's Boost and done this thing.
Well, okay, so they match all of the following criteria. So, interesting. Okay, so these people from this. Now I'm trying to think that maybe this would be a very targeted group, because now it's almost seems like you want to find people that have played, that have purchased at least one purchase, and within the last 2 weeks, and have also played Boosters Boost, and have purchased at least once.
Final answer?
That's my final answer.
Okay, so you see just how long it took him to understand that, and I think that just sort of gives some color to, when you're designing something, it seems like, oh yeah, everyone will understand this, and even this is, one of our clearest versions, and it still takes him, sort of longer than you might expect. Okay, so just to sum up, You know, moral number one is that chalk is cheap. It's definitely best to do your research and your design iteration before you launch. It'll make the flight and the launch easier, much better than needing repairs in midair. The second one is never design alone. Use your team, design team, product team, and most importantly your users. Get their feedback on whatever you're building. And lastly, rule number three, it's okay to use the force, but use the data-driven UX force, and you'll fly a lot higher. Okay, thanks a lot. Oh, and one more thing. So all these resources are on Confluence under product, under user experience, and you can find the findings there of past user studies and a few presentations. And if you're working on anything that an end user sees, please contact me, and I'll be happy to help. Okay, thanks a lot.